Roccia's recent release wasn't all that impressive, as I believe her to be the worst limited 5-star sub-DPS in all of Wuthering Waves. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So we have a couple of limited 5-star sub-DPSes in the game at this stage: Yinlin, Changli, Zhezhi, and then the recently released Roccia. Changli is more so a quick swap DPS, but we'll include her in the sub-DPS role in the context of this video, because she still typically serves as a second slot teammate, as I personally like to call them. Roccia, in my opinion, has ended up being the total worst out of a lot without question. So let's evaluate each limited 5-star sub-DPS in Wuthering Waves, and then talk about why Roccia has next to no value when put up against them. When it comes to Yinlin, I actually don't think that highly of her compared to most people. I think she's a solid unit, don't get me wrong, especially after we got 5-piece Empyrean added to the game, which made her damage output far better. It especially helps when running Sigless Yinlin, and offers another avenue in which she can help buff a team. So she provides her usual Liberation and Electric buffing from her outro, her high personal damage, and then plenty of attack percent for your team's main on-field DPS. However, she tends to be very difficult to play for most newer players, which makes her rather inaccessible, and even if you are good enough at the game to make the most out of her, the damage she deals is very underwhelming if you don't have String Master. Because so much of her value weighs in her personal output, not having String Master can really hurt the wider value of Yinlin on an account. Even if I don't believe her to be that strong of a pull anymore, especially when you realize that she's quite replaceable in a lot of her teams, it'd be wrong of me not to deliver this character credit where credit's due. She's actually quite a comfortable option for Changli hyper teams, being one of the easiest to play options alongside him. Her outro provides perfect buffs which coincide with his kit very nicely. She's lovely in Virgil Roth Hyper too if you're interested in playing Mr. Final Fantasy VII as his own main carry. It's not a very meta team in general due to Churro not being that strong of a unit, however it's still a very viable use case for Yinlin. You'll also find that she's an excellent Zhezhi teammate, as her Liberation buffs help out with the Magistrate's huge ult nuke, not to mention how her coordinated attacks are great for helping Zhezhi build up stacks. If you don't have the silly painter, or are using her in another TOA team, which is realistic considering that we have lovely ladies such as Carlotta in the game now, then this saucy spy ends up being quite the formidable second slot option. Massive bonus points if you use String Master, because then her personal damage comes into play too. There's also Yinlin Changli quick swap, but most people aren't going to be playing this due to the difficulty of optimizing it. Even so, it's an option which exists, so I'm mentioning it. You can also slot this character into many teams in general, but typically, there will be another option that will work better. For example, you can use her with Encore quite nicely, but it's significantly better to just use Sanhua, who's free. Either way, Yinlin has definitive use cases in which she is very solid, even if I personally consider her to have quite the host of drawbacks. On the overall sub-DPS rankings, I'm going to slot her into A tier. Consistently neat unit. When it comes to Changli, it's interesting because her value is extremely dynamic relative to player skill. She doesn't really have a main DPS that she's perfect with at the moment. The closest we have is Changli Yao, who's able to utilize quick swapping well. However, most players aren't going to be quick swapping, as that's a more high-end technique used by more hardcore players. You can also argue that she shouldn't even be included in this video, because quick swap DPS doesn't really constitute as being a sub-DPS. However, she's still generally a second slot character, which is why we're going to discuss her here today. If you're able to utilize Changli to the complete best of her ability, enjoying all of her really complex mechanics and techniques, then she's an extremely valuable second slot character that can be slotted into nearly any team that you can think of. If you're on the more casual side and you haven't put extensive time into learning how she works, then she's going to be pretty bad for you, if I'm being entirely honest. There's no other real way to steer it. She is extremely skill intensive. However, unlike Roccia, at least this means Changli has a specialty. Expert players can take fantastic advantage of her kit and more difficult game mechanics. And when we finally get a character who is made specifically for this fine lady to work with, we'll see her meta value rise even more. Her potential is far from capped, and that makes her a very interesting character in my opinion. With that being said, it'd be wrong of me to give this character a high ranking, when maybe less than 5% of the player base can take full advantage of her, perhaps even less than that. I don't think Changli is bad by any means, but I would say she's in the same vein as Yinlin. Solid, but skippable. I think it would be a good time for me to mention at this point that this gorgeous Phoenix lady is actually one of the most used characters on my entire account. And is one of my favorite characters in Wuthering Waves. I use her all the time, she's always in my team, yet even I, as an avid enjoyer of this unit, can acknowledge the ease of use issues hold her back for most players. Yinlin is rather simple to execute in comparison to her. However, what's important to highlight here is that Roccia is going to be mid no matter what, whereas Changli has the potential to become extremely good when put in the right hands. Also, Changli Yao is an extremely solid team. This intelligent woman of puzzles and phoenixes does far more for her teams than what Roccia does for hers, as a well-played Changli is extremely influential, whereas Sanhua can do Roccia's job just fine. I would like to mention her recent synergy with Carlotta too. This is a lovely team, and if you're able to play it well, then you will 100% get great performance out of it. However, once again, if you aren't good at the game, then this doesn't really change your value at all, but if you can take advantage of it, then this is a massive boon to your current value. I'm ranking Changli below Yinlin simply due to usability issues. I consider these two to be about equal in pull value, with things tipping a little more in the Saucy Spy's favor. Both have an extremely unique set of benefits and drawbacks which really shape their identity in the meta. I want to add that Changli could easily move above Yinlin, literally 0 questions asked, if you're a good player, but I'm trying to assume an accessible skill level here. Alright, if you've been keeping up with my recent Wuthering Waves videos, then you know how I feel about this silly painter. Consider me to be one of our #1 shills, because I believe her to be a top 3 character in the meta. She has a host of insanely good qualities while having borderline 0 drawbacks. It's literally stupid how good this unit is, considering that she was supposed to be a mediocre filler release back in 1.2. Zhezhi isn't just a good sub-DPS, she's an amazing character on the whole. You see, you might think top 3 is a bit far, but when you actually break down how many pros she has, you start to realize how freaking busted this character actually is. Amazing skill percent buffing, ease of use, coordinated attacks for Zhezhi, great personal damage, ability to hold either 5-piece Moonlit Clouds or Empyrean for greater team buffing, can make great use out of String Master if you already have it, works with 2 of the best DPSs in the game in Zhezhi and Carlotta, while also being very silly and squishy looking. I don't know about you, but to me, those all sound like some pretty dang good qualities. You can try to come up with negatives for her, but it's very hard to do so. My main gripe with this character is that there isn't 2 of her, so you gotta use her with Carlotta if you're trying to choose who to use her with between Zhezhi and the esteemed Montelli lady. Jump cancelling also has to be one of the easiest techniques in the entire game. Simply press jump right after Zhezhi appears out of her cranes, and you can speed up her setup time by quite a neat amount. You see, she is everything that Roccia is not. The clown kid truly lives up to her profession as a clown because she's so dang close to a freaking free 4-star in terms of character performance, whereas Zhezhi is definitively better than any other potential Carlotta option. The only one that comes close would be Changli's synergy with the Montelli lady, which I mentioned earlier, which in fairness is very good, but as I've already discussed, Changli is not an easy unit to play. Most people are gonna much prefer using Zhezhi. This character is S tier on this list, and S tier on any wider meta Wuthering Waves tier list in my opinion. Stupidly powerful character that hosts bucketloads of value. This is what a 5-star sub-DPS should be. She puts Roccia's kit to absolute shame. Then we arrive at the Clown Kid, the most skippable unit in the entirety of Wuthering Waves, and it's not even close. When we looked at every other limited 5-star sub-DPS throughout this video, each had some very defining traits that made them strong in their own right. Roccia's entire gimmick is that she's supposed to be the best in slot Camellia support, and while she does achieve that generally speaking, Sanhua is free, and totally negates any need to pull for the Clown Kid. She'll get the job done for you just fine. In fact, saying that Sanhua only does fine would be disingenuous, because the fact that Roccia is only barely better than her, while oftentimes being worse in most scenarios, yikes, that's not too good. In fairness, if you give Roccia a couple of sequences, then sure, she ends up being better than the 4-star, but that will literally never be more worth doing over just getting more copies of the crazy lady herself, especially when you consider that Camellia has one of the best sequence lineups in all of Wuthering Waves. She lacks the skill progression of Changli, the general versatility and insane damage of Yinlin, and the insane meta value of Zhezhi. Sure, her personal damage is good, but it sure isn't Yinlin levels of good. She simply lacks any specialty where she is the de facto best in slot. Okay, she was made for Camellia, but I just can't see her as being a good pull when Sanhua is so darn close to her in value. I genuinely don't know why she wasn't made to be a 4-star character. It would have made a lot more sense, especially when you consider how underwhelming she is in value. It's not like Yinlin where pulling for signature can suddenly bolster her value on your account. Roccia is perpetually stuck in a state of being aggressively mid until further notice. Sure, her buffs look really good on paper, but when you need to use up so much field time to access those buffs down at S0, not worth it. Part of what makes Sanhua so good is her insanely quick Concerto rotation. Sadly, that makes it super difficult for Roccia to compete, especially when you realize that the Magistrate's Bodyguard features a ton of basic percent buffing in her outro skill. Yikes. C tier in the sub-DPS rankings. When you lay her qualities out next to the others, you can really see how underwhelming she is in the grand scheme of things. I have very little faith that she's eventually going to get better. I think if I even slashed her field time down in half, she'd already feel like a much more valuable pull for Camellia. I feel like Kuro knew that Roccia was one of the less popular characters when it came to the reveals of Rinascita's new cast, or they at least predicted that she'd hold the least amount of interest. So they went and made her kinda mid. At that stage, I am not sure why they didn't simply make her a 4-star, because then her state would be a lot more forgivable. As it stands, I suppose she mostly exists to bait out Camellia fans that are willing to hyper-invest in any potential upgrades for her. She's so underwhelming compared to Zhezhi, as an example, who most regarded as a filler release. So what's the Clown Kid's excuse? But what do you think about Roccia? Am I being too harsh on her, or do you agree that she kinda sucks in comparison to the others? Let me know down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I have a ZZZ second channel. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. I'd also like to mention that I stream on Twitch. I stream once a week, every week on Saturday, starting from 3 PM UK time. Come along so we can play Wuthering Waves, ZZZ, and do some other fun stuff together. Hopefully this video was able to tell you why I personally think that Roccia is the worst 5-star sub-DPS when compared up against the others. This has been Juice, signing out, and the only reason I can think of as to why somebody would actually want this character is for her cool ghost guy. He's pretty neat.